This week at the lab, we were looking at our armbar offense and defense concepts. We only used one game to demonstrate these concepts, but we broke it down into two different variations depending on the skills that we were trying to develop. So the game, very simple. Offensive player starts with a fully locked out armbar. Defensive player, their objective is to escape that armbar. Offensive player, their objective is to apply and finish that armbar. So first round goes generally as expected in that kind of scenario, given no real context or no real feedback or guidance on how to escape a fully locked out armbar. We start seeing a lot of pretty quick finishes and very little escapes. It's to be expected. They only play for about a minute each, just to give them a couple of chances to sort of feel out the position, feel a couple of armbars, and fail a couple of times essentially. Build some context into how difficult a fully locked out armbar can feel to escape when we try and apply the wrong solution to that particular problem. So the immediate issues that most of the guys were having, and the reason they were getting submitted quickly, was their solution to the armbar was to try and tense their arm, squeeze their arm back to the body from a fully locked out armbar, and basically trying to muscle out of a deep locked out submission and a huge problem. The main reason for this is, whether or not it's a fight or flight response, just like a feeling of panic. This triggers like a muscle co-contraction, meaning the biceps, triceps, the forearms, the shoulder, they all contract all at once. This massively increases the stiffness and rigidity of the joint, massively limiting any mobility in the joint and preloading the elbow fulcrum, which massively accelerates the leverage for the attacking player. So the concept that we looked at to reduce the amount of submissions and improve the defensive player's odds on actually escaping was a counterintuitive concept. Meaning the intuitive player was to try and muscle out. The counterintuitive concept was to fully relax the arm while in that deep armbar, over exaggerating the amount of relaxation in the arm. So we did like a live demo on like both myself and some of the students who were really struggling with relaxing, having them tense, having them do what they did in the first round, that first solution, and seeing how quick they tap and how quickly that armbar can be applied. And then going into that fully relaxed arm and looking at the increased range of motion, where they feel the pain point and the difference between it, how much longer they could potentially stay in that armbar. The overall observation that we were really trying to give them was, relaxing makes the armbar significantly looser overall, we'll say, both in like how it feels in it being applied and just the connection that the offensive player has to you. And it buys significantly more time for you to figure your way out. In simple autistic terms, in a fully locked out armbar, strength isn't the answer. The arm that's being attacked is already fully locked out. It isn't going to help you escape. The way to escape a fully locked out armbar, the tool that we use to escape a fully locked out armbar, isn't strength, but movement. Something we talk about all of the time in class is that tension inhibits or restricts movement. So the more we relax, the more movement we have available, which increases our escape potential. As we start getting better at relaxing and finding our way out via that movement, our confidence in being able to escape that fully locked out armbar increases. So as I get better at escaping, I become more confident. As I become more confident, it becomes easier to relax. As it becomes easier to relax, it becomes easier to move. And as it becomes easier to move, it becomes even easier to escape. So giving them that kind of guidance, we throw them back in the mix and we see a huge difference in terms of their approach to escaping. Now, their actual escape attempts aren't necessarily that good, but what they are feeling is the increased range of motion in their arm just from relaxing. I had a few comments like, oh, it still feels like I'm getting armbarred. I was like, yeah, because you are, right? Like, I didn't say, oh, relax and you can't be submitted. That's not what I said. I said, relax and you'll buy yourself a little bit extra time. Relax and you'll increase the range of motion of those ligaments, of those tendons that are actually being attacked. And so we kind of broke into what's actually happening in an armbar to give a deeper understanding of why relaxing makes it easier to escape. And so one of the things that we spoke about is it really does sound a lot cooler when we're applying an armbar to say that we're breaking the arm. It sounds really cool when we say that, but that's not what we're doing. What we're actually attacking is the elbow joint, which is the ligaments. That's what we're attacking. At worst, like the worst possible outcome realistically is we dislocate the elbow joint or completely tear the ligament, but we're not breaking the arm. And so with that understanding, the effect of tension means we shorten the ligaments by squeezing and tensing the muscle, which makes them significantly easier to tear and damage. Making them shorter and tighter makes them easier to damage. Relaxing means the tendons and ligaments lengthen naturally. They regain most, if not all, of their elasticity, and it becomes harder for them to damage. Tensing basically applies 80 to 90% of the armbar yourself, with your opponent only having to apply 10% to finish it. Relaxing forces your opponent to do 100% of the work by giving them nothing. This can really disrupt a lot of people who have gotten used to armbarring people who are essentially helping them out. So if they can generally only finish armbars when the other person is tensing and they only have to do 10 to 20% of the work, when you give them nothing, a lot of people really struggle to actually apply and finish the armbar. So we threw them back in the mix. Them having a better understanding on like why armbars work, what it is that we're attacking, what is actually being injured, allows them to understand the need for relaxation. And we talked about it in terms of how jiu-jitsu's kind of traditionally taught in terms of steps. And I explained relaxing isn't a step. Relaxing has to be like a subconscious physiological response to that position. Because we can go over it time and time and time again, be like, yeah, you gotta relax. But then when you're actually put in that armbar, if your initial response isn't to relax but to tense, you're gonna get armbarred all the same. You can't like tense up and then relax. It's too late. You're probably gonna get finished. We play these games and go over it and over and over and over so that our reaction, our instinct in that position becomes to relax. And we can only really do that by training that position ecologically. You can't drill it. It's not a knowledge thing. It's a experience and physical response thing. Letting them go back in, we start looking at them moving, relaxing, and realizing that their mobility is massively amplified by the fact that they're relaxing to that degree. A couple of things that we did see and to be aware of when you start applying this yourself is a lot of people were relaxing, starting to turn out, feeling like a block or some resistance, and then their arm would tense as they would start squeezing early or trying to rip their arm out, and then the armbar would be applied. You got to keep that arm relaxed the whole time. You have to essentially think that the arm that's being attacked is just out of commission. It isn't going to help you escape. It's been isolated completely from your torso. It's currently being attacked. Tensing it, trying to turn it, trying to do anything with it is going to put tension in the arm, and it's going to make it easier for the person attacking you to finish that armbar. It's out of commission. You've made too many mistakes. You've been put in a really bad, dangerous position. Trying to use that arm to get out isn't going to help you. The tool that we're going to use is movement. That's how we're going to get out of this. Doesn't mean that it's going to work 100% of the time. If someone's really good at armbars and they've gotten you fully locked out like that, tough titties. But what we did look at was the kind of movements that we can make. And we only kind of really isolated and identified two, but there are obviously more options that you can take. We looked at moving long distance, which is the more common way, which is kind of like a classic running man escape, we'll call it. We have some differences in terms of what we're looking at, or we have the shorter distance where we're just trying to get our body close to our arm, meaning we move closer to them. We looked at the pros and cons of both. The cons of the shorter distance is that it's easier for the attacking player to block, right? So you could be trying to get your hips close to them and they can sort of just frame off and stay away from you and keep your arm isolated. The issue with the longer distance ones is that we have longer to go. It doesn't mean one of them's more or less effective, just depends on the situation and who you're going against and how they're set up. And so, we throw them back in with that guidance and sort of see what they do. And the cool thing about it at this point was people are actively getting out, but sometimes they're getting stuck. And the place in which they were getting stuck is they were obviously trying to do something they've seen on YouTube or Instagram, or maybe have learned previously from more like traditional coaches. They're essentially just trying to do the running man escape where they just run and drag their hips along the mat the whole time. And then they were getting caught and stuck and getting their arms stretched out and the shoulder stretched out, and they were having to tap. And so we reminded them something that we talk about in jiu-jitsu all the time, or at least at the lab all the time, is that jiu-jitsu is a game of hip dominance. So we start in that position in a pretty low dominant position, right? My back and my hips are flat on the ground and my arm has been isolated away from my torso. Their hips are underneath my shoulder attacking that arm. I'm not winning that exchange from that position. But as soon as I start turning and I get my shoulder disconnected from their hips, like, it isn't necessarily about like how far I can run my hips towards them in order to be able to escape so that I end up like flat on my stomach or something like that. I'm trying to get my hips up in the air. I'm trying to rotate and turn my hips up as fast as I can. I'm trying to get up to my knees as fast as I can, right? Because once I'm up to my knees, my escape, my ability to escape is going to be a lot easier. And so it's trying to build up so I can get my frame on the legs or pull that arm out or isolate their leg and pull it through or whatever it is, right? But it's all based on my ability to get up to my knees. And that's what's going to make it easier to escape, because once I get up to my knees, even if they still have like a connection to my arm or my shoulder or whatever, they're now flat on their back with their hips connected to the ground and my hips are upright facing them. As soon as I get my arm out, I'm now on top of them and I'm passing or maybe even attacking something if it becomes available. Again, threw them back in with that little bit of guidance and the difference was night and day. We basically got to the point where from the beginning, attacking player was just getting every single armbar. No one really escaped. After a couple of rounds of this and some sort of conceptual guidance, it totally flipped. where we weren't seeing any arm bars applied whatsoever. Everyone was getting out, and everyone was kind of getting really frustrated that they weren't able to catch any arm bars, but they were also very sort of thrilled that they weren't getting armbarred from a really deep armbar position. It's exciting to learn something new, to realize like, oh, okay, like even when I'm this deep into a problem, I still have some solutions, that I can still be in the game, provided I make the right plays at the right time. So now we had to make a bit of a focus shift, right? So we put a lot of focus on the defense, understanding, you know, how the armbar works, like anatomically, but still looking at it through a defensive lens. Like, how am I going to get out and get back in the game? The reason we look at the defense and knowing how to escape a somewhat decent armbar, because if the armbar is somewhat decent or okay, I'm going to be able to get out fairly easily if I understand escapes. So now that subpar or mid-level, mid-tier armbars are now not an option in the gym, because if you throw up an armbar that just isn't that effective, people are just going to relax, turn, and walk out of it, right? So now our armbars are going to have to be really good, if not perfect, as everyone gets better at defending them. So we start looking at how arm bars work offensively. To do that, we broke it down into two main parts. A, how an arm bar actually works. We kind of briefly talked about that in terms of like what we're attacking, but we'll go into that a little bit deeper. And B, how to stay connected when the opponent uses movement as their tool of escape. So that first point that we talked about, how the armbar actually works, let's dive into that a little bit deeper. So the common view and the thing that makes people really struggle with armbars is, yes, we're attacking the elbow, but that puts most of their focus as the player on attacking the elbow. I think a better teaching lens, and I figured this out kind of through how I teach leg locks. Oh, well, it applies the armbars the same way. The leg attaches into the hip, the arm attaches into the torso through the shoulder. Realizing that it translates from not only leg locks to arm bars, the idea is we're trying to isolate via a connection at the proximal insertion point of that limb. In this case, the arm bar is inserting into the shoulder. So our hips or legs or knees or whatever it is that we do, it has to be connected to the shoulder. Now, the shoulder really matters because it allows us to restrict and dictate the lever base of the arm, separating the arm from the torso and its ability to generate power, right? So the closer the arm gets to the torso, the stronger and more power it's able to generate. The further I get the arm away from the torso, the more it becomes weaker and the less power it's able to generate, and the easier it's going to be for me to attack that arm. If I lose that shoulder connection, I lose my ability to isolate the arm. They're going to be able to get that arm back to the torso, and I lose the arm bar in response. The second piece that I need for an armbar is a connection to the opposite end of the lever. So that could be like around the hand or around the fingers, provided I'm not splitting them like in single digits and I'm keeping them all connected together. And so for an armbar, realistically, all I need is two things. I need a connection to the proximal insertion point, in this case being the shoulder, and then the opposite end of the lever, like right at the end of the lever, which is in this case the hand or the fingers. And those are the only two things I need, because if I have the shoulder, I also have the elbow. The elbow is also available to me. But if I'm putting my focus on just the elbow and I lose the shoulder, anyone who's halfway decent is just going to pull that arm right out. So we look at prioritizing the connections in order to apply the armbar, or staying connected as they move. So if they're going to use movement as their tool of escape, the way that we're going to stay connected to them so that we can restrict that movement eventually and apply the armbar is by also utilizing our own movement. Knowing that we have two essential connections, the proximal isolation point being the shoulder and the distal joint end of the lever, in this case being the hand. The defender movement has the potential to create disconnect at the shoulder from my hips or legs or whatever it is that I'm using, and that can mean the arm is pulled back to the torso. So if we prioritize that shoulder connection over just squeezing the arm and holding on to it as tight as we can, if we prioritize that shoulder connection, especially over the hand grip's okay. We need it to finish it, but it's going to be better if I let go of the hand and maybe connect to the elbow, if that allows me to stay into a more effective connection to the shoulder, right? Like if I lose the shoulder and I kind of keep the hand, they can still pull that arm back to the body, because it's going to be really hard to just hold onto the hand. Whereas if I have that shoulder and I lose the hand, I can still stay connected to that shoulder and re-isolate that distal joint connection at a better time. A practical cue that was helpful for a lot of the guys is something I say in jiu-jitsu regardless, that you never want to be flat on your back. You never want to have your shoulders and your hips flat on the ground. The way I encourage people to have this in their head all the time is I'll say like, all right guys, when is it appropriate in jiu-jitsu to be completely flat on your back? And then pretty much the entire class will just shout never at me, which is the right answer. And it's because I want it to be subconscious. I want it to be like, hey, when's it appropriate to be flat on your back? When's it good to be flat on your back? For them to all know that it's never. It means when they're rolling, and if they're flat on their back, I don't have to be like, oh, get on your side or do this. I can just be like, you're flat on your back. They're not worried about escaping. They're not worried about changing anything. The only thing they're focused on is getting off the flat of the back. Then they can start worrying about everything else. And so that was a practical cue that we used here to sort of improve their ability to chase, is that even though I'm offensive and I have the armbar, I'm doing it flat on my back. As they start moving, me trying to get off the flat of my back to chase them, I'm just a step behind every single time. It's really difficult for me to chase them because I can't rotate my hips. I can lift my hips by bridging up and down, but I can't rotate them. There's an extra step for me to be able to get my hips out of the way so I can rotate them because I'm flat on my back. And by the time I've done that step, they're already up on their knees and escaping, right? I'm just a step too late by being flat on my back. So the way that we applied that cue practically was to apply the armbar from our side, like from the side of our hip, shoulder, whatever it is. Even if it was like a really subtle positional shift just towards one side or the other, that meant when the defensive player started turning out and moving, that they were able to make that read and immediately start rotating their hips with them, rather than trying to get their hips up in the air from the flat of their shoulders and then rotate, meaning they weren't a step behind. They were able to be a step on them the entire way. The armbar works because we have the arm isolated, and then we stay connected because we are able to move with them by rotating our hips around with the shoulder as they move. Now that we have a better understanding of those two things, we can talk about actually applying the armbar. It's really common in terms of just how we learn traditionally to think that it's how far I can bend the arm. And, a lot of the times that we do that, we're going to get taps, like we're going to get wins. And a lot of that is going to come down to what we spoke about at the beginning, that generally the person that we're applying it on is going to be very tense. So they're actually applying 80 to 90% of that armbar for you. And all you have to do is try and bend their arm, and eventually they'll tap. But as we start doing it on people who are relaxing and we start trying to bend their arm in the same way, we end up raising their shoulder. And as their shoulder raises, it actually unlocks even more movement for them to be able to start trying to build up to their knees. And we actually make it easier. As we actively try and bend the arm, we make it easier for them to escape when they're relaxed. And so it can be really frustrating when people have this concept down. When we take that idea of when you tense your arm, you essentially make it easier for the attacker to finish it more effectively. You're applying 80-90% of it yourself in order to manually put that tension into their arm. So even if they're relaxing, you find a way to manually put that tension in their arm so that you can apply the armbar easier. That's how we apply an armbar. That's how we think about applying armbars, so that they go on fast, regardless of if they do the right thing and you do the right thing. It doesn't matter, because they are in a defensive situation. They're still in a losing situation. If their right thing is countered by your right thing, you win because you're in the offensive situation. How do we take the slack out of the arm manually is what we briefly looked at it just as a guide. And don't worry, there's still ways to apply the armbar, even though they now have these skills. And essentially the idea of it is it's like taking the slack out of the ligament, right? So they are doing the right thing. They're relaxing. They're allowing that extra lengthening of those tendons. So with the shoulder connection that we have, like a really deep, nice shoulder connection, we can start to use that distal joint connection, that end of the lever joint connection, not to try and bend the arm, but to pull it up, to stretch that ligament out, right? And as I put my hips into the shoulder, as I stretch it out, it does essentially the same thing as if they were tensing their arm themselves, right? It puts like this co-tension in between the bicep, tricep, and the shoulder, but I'm putting it in manually, not by trying to bend it, but by really, really stretching it out. And at that point, I can do one of a few things. I can try and bend it the same way I would traditionally, which, that works just as well. But the only issue with bending it that I have found for myself personally is it's hard to try and like pull and stretch it out and bend it at the same time. What can happen is I go from stretching it out to focus on bending it, then I lose that tension, and then they relax again, and then maybe they can turn out. So that's what I found personally, but maybe it'll work for you. We're all a little bit different. The way I've found and prefer to do it, to finish the armbar, I should say, is once I've stretched it out, I'll basically start squeezing into the shoulder, and it kind of creates this weird hyperextension from the shoulder up to the elbow, rather than doing the hyperextension from the hand to the shoulder, which is like, that's more traditional. But I found that once I've stretched the arm out, actually putting more tension and more pressure into the shoulder, it kind of like applies the armbar, but on the opposite joint to the fulcrum, and people tap very quickly to that. And I feel like I can keep the arm stretched out nice and easy as I put some pressure into the shoulder. That's kind of my personal preference on that. But either one is fine, I think, as long as you're getting the armbar. Now, the main result of it, what you'll notice is you'll stretch it out and you'll go to apply it, and you think you're gonna have to apply like all of the same range of motion you might have to when you apply it traditionally. And it's really surprising, especially for the player who's just been relaxing and getting out of armbars, nice and easily for the past hour, 2 hours, depending on how long you train, that the armbar goes on even quicker than when they were tensing in the first time, right? Like it's a really fast, really tight armbar, and it doesn't just affect the elbow. As soon as it starts applying, it goes right through the elbow. Kind of feels like the bicep's going to tear also, and it feels like the tendons and the joints in your shoulder are going to separate also. Like it attacks right through the arm. It is really, really not pleasant, and they tap really quickly. It goes on way faster than just trying to bend the arm. So that's also a huge plus, is that not only is the submission tighter and more effective and harder to escape, it goes on really quickly. So they aren't trying to fight out of it once you've gotten them like that. We kind of just talked about that, but we didn't really go into like teaching or having people like apply it. I think maybe like I've spoken to a few people in the lab personally about it when they ask me like why my arm bars feel so much tighter than what they're previously used to. I kind of just like speak to them about that idea in general. They found ways to maybe apply that in these games just from like previous one-to-one discussion maybe, but it wasn't like a big thing I was pushing everyone to try. You can just get up and walk, you know. Hey, man, that was so funny. Just you trying to be polite and can you not see me? Of course you can see. You can't see me. Of course you can. You're crawling across the floor like a... Oh, that was too funny. Lord have mercy. All right, what was I talking about? What ended up happening in the last couple of games was the offensive player was really getting fixated on being able to effectively apply the armbar, and they weren't really actually having a lot of success in either being able to apply it or staying in the chase. The defensive player was doing just such an amazing job in pretty much every circumstance of escaping over and over and over again. And so we took the same game and we just made it slightly different. We just changed the constraint slightly. And so instead of having the offensive player trying to finish the armbar and the defensive player trying to escape, we turned the game into a rally, meaning that just like in tennis, you're both trying to stay in the game. You're trying to help each other out, but you're still playing with some level of intensity, maybe like 60, 70%. And now the difference that we made was if the defensive player, or if the offensive player rather, loses the connection to the shoulder, I want the defensive player to just get out as if they failed. However, I remind them that you're not competing against each other now, you're competing with each other. Right now you're on the same team. You're trying to stay in the rally together as best as you can. Now, if the offensive player makes an egregious mistake that leads to a really deep disconnection from the shoulder to the hip or whatever, you just take that arm out, but that's a fail for both of you. That's not a fail for the offensive player. You both failed because you're supposed to be working together. So if you've run ahead of them too far that they weren't able to keep up in the rally, like yes, punish them so they know that they would have lost it there. So they're not developing, poor skills, but realize that maybe you need to slow down the next time you go there. You're not trying to actually get out. You're trying to stay in the game together. Towards the end, it was night and day, right? The guys were doing a really good job on finding ways to stay connected to that shoulder. We were seeing some really beautiful scrambles. I was really impressed over the two lessons on Monday and Wednesday, how much we've seen people develop not only their ability to escape, but as people were getting better at escaping and really hitting some really good scrambles, that the offensive players were doing a great job on staying attached. I'm sure as much as they wanted to stay attached and still develop that skill and, develop the skill of being better at escaping a fully locked out armbar, there's always that level of disappointment that we're not actually able to apply as many armbars now because everyone's just become exceptionally more difficult to finish. And so the encouragement was, we're gonna look at how to restrict movement, right? Those are the skills to develop next. I can't just teach you the entire thing. I wish we could just get through that quickly, but we got to train and we have to practice these things in real time. As we get better at these things as a gym, well, then the information on how do I restrict his movement in the scramble? How do I tangle him up in the scramble so that he can't just keep turning out? And so that sort of leads us into just wrapping up in the overall mindset shift that we were looking for and the fundamentals that we went over. The fundamentals that we really wanted the guys to embody were the defensive fundamentals of relaxation and movement being the keys to escape in limb submissions. The offensive fundamentals that we really wanted to look at was how to isolate the limbs from the torso, meaning the proximal insertion point and the distal joint. If they're staying mobile and using movement to escape, that we also have to have that tool in our tool belt in order to stay connected. Otherwise, they're just going to get out every time. Now, these are our core fundamentals that we want the gym to have before we start building and adding specific things like leg configurations and dilemmas and how to restrict their play and how to actually apply those different kind of variations of armbars. We can get into that once we have these fundamentals down. Another mindset shift that we really wanted them to take in was the idea of tension restricting movement is universal. It's ubiquitous. It applies everywhere. Learning to relax in all situations for proper movement is going to make you a significantly better grappler. I thought this was going to be like a really quick video, because I was like, oh, armbars, it was really simple. This will be a really quick video. And as I've been going through it, I'm like, oh, there's a lot of information that we went through here. And we got a ton of footage, so hopefully there's like some really cool B-roll and we all got to see it. That's like I haven't really seen anyone who teaches armbars that way, but even though this might not necessarily be the way that you've previously learned armbars, I recommend you go and try it with a training partner and play the game and really try and relax and really try and feel the difference in terms of the range of motion that you have. Obviously, you're going to see the B-roll for the physical demonstration, but this is one of those things that you just have to feel. You just have to go and do it. There's a couple of things that I can't teach you as a coach, and that is feeling and timing, how something feels and how to develop the right timing in order to be able to do these things as they come up. I can't do that for you. You have to be in the problem yourself, figure it out. The guidance and the concepts, I can give you a little bit of help with that, but feeling and timing, you got to go and do that for yourself. If there's any questions on anything that we went over, just like same as always, fire them my way and I'll be happy to dive into them if they're good questions. If they're not conducive to anything and it's just a waste of my time. Again, I work full time and I teach jiu-jitsu and I'm married and I go to the gym. It's like I'm busy, so I'll do the best that I can. But if they're really good questions and you're polite and nice and I want to help you, then I will. If you're a prick, go be a prick.